All right, so we're going to be doing a slightly different format to our usual format of viewing with jars, in which, well, this is my face, this is my views. So today, I'm going to be reacting to or providing some of my views on a segment of a podcast, Alex O'Connor's podcast. He's an atheist, a very articulate atheist. I really enjoy listening to Alex O'Connor. I've been following him for a little while now, and I always enjoy the way he approaches topics. Enjoy the way he thinks them through. I find it a very logical, reasoned approach, albeit he is an atheist. And the term atheist itself, right, I think it's a bit too basic a lot of the times, because, yes, it's quite clear that Alex O'Connor is atheistic of most definitely this Judeo-Christian and even Islamic conception of God, or at least what's mainstream amongst them. But is he atheistic of how we sick view God through obviously the equal God, non-dual concept of it? I'm not too sure. That's probably interesting to see what his views on if we presented this equal God type philosophy to him. How would he react to it? Not too sure. It'll be interesting maybe one day to find out. But today, what we're going to be doing is covering a section of his podcast in which he's speaking to somebody called John Lennox, who is a Oxford mathematician and also a Christian. And what Alex kind of does is he presents him with that time-tested question, the problem of evil. It's something I've written about as well, but I've not yet published, of how I personally approach this problem and how I would answer it. I suppose I'll go through that today as these guys go through their views. Well, probably worth actually giving mine first, and then maybe we can just like interpret it through this. So if you're not aware what the problem with evil is, it's essentially this question that states, well, if God is all compassionate, why does he allow for suffering and evil to happen in the planet amongst humans, etc., right? Why does he allow even this much of it to happen? If he's so compassionate, why does he just not obviously allow us to live in a perpetual state of sort of like pleasure or satisfaction or contentment? It's a very good question, and it does puzzle a lot of the religious people. And as of yet, I mean, it's quite an old question as well. It's been sort of like debated around for like God knows how long, right? So yeah, my sort of view on this is that the way obviously we view God is that it's not necessarily an external entity in which it's separate from the creation. We believe that the Creator is not only in the creation, but there's just not a distinction at all. It's just complete oneness. There is no distinction between a creator and creation. It's just all that same one, that same existence that we all experience and all are a part of, right? The whole idea that if you're not stuck in traffic, you are the traffic, is that kind of concept, right? We're all part of this God. It's through our egos, through our humne, in which we sort of delude ourselves into thinking we're separate from reality, where no, we are very much a part of it. So that's the kind of sort of like base position, I suppose, in a nutshell. So if we take the implications of that, what does that then mean for, well, why do we sort of like call them like all compassionate and all this kind of stuff? Well, I suppose it's the best way to put this is that, well, it's God themselves that's suffering, and it's the God themselves who are causing the suffering. So if it's God on both ends of the equation here, what does that mean for even the concept of suffering itself? Does it even exist at any objective level? I don't think it does. I think it cancels out. So if God is the one suffering and the one suffering the suffering, then what exactly is suffering? What's the meaning of that? The same way it goes with pleasure. If God is the one causing pleasure and the one also experiencing pleasure, then even pleasure sort of filters out. I suppose you can only have a hot and a cold when there's a reference point, right? Because what's hot for a camel is different to what's hot for a polar bear. So it's like a very relative term. These are human constructs. These are human labels that we produce out of our own home, our own sense of self, our own sort of orientation when we're looking at reality and labeling it and giving it names. And then the sort of experiences that cause us harm, I suppose, or that we find dissatisfaction from, we've labeled that phenomenon as human beings suffering. But this doesn't ultimately exist in any sort of objective sense, because again, it's just reality providing these outcomes and also experiencing the outcomes itself. So the concept of suffering just sort of like drops out of that level. It doesn't mean that suffering doesn't exist. at all, any level. But it doesn't exist at an ultimate level. It exists at a sort of transactionary, everyday human level, in which we're the same way we're sort of deluding ourselves to be separate from reality, separate from the universe, separate from God. And then by extension of that, we've sort of also deluded ourselves to think that we have a free will. Again, by extension of these kind of delusions, these heuristics in which we're operating our existence by, suffering is just another one of these delusions, I suppose. A very important delusion, because if we didn't have a distinction as human beings, as egotistical things, as what's pleasure, what's suffering, or what's good, what's bad, or what's predator or prey, we simply wouldn't be here. It's an evolutionary thing that we've developed this kind of like discernment and labeling of our reality into these distinct categories. Again, without it, we just wouldn't be here. But we've advanced to such a stage, we've become quite competent at labeling our reality and responding to it, that now we've basically turned in that analysis of reality in of itself. We go inwards, we do some introspection now, and that's when we're realizing, well, these constructs which we've created for our survival in non-survival situations, let's conduct an inquiry to see, well, what is the actual nature of these things? And that's when we start to realize, well, okay, maybe it gets a bit murky now. Like, is there actually this concept of a duality between hot, cold, suffering, pleasure, good, bad, sin, whatever, right, or virtue? These kind of things, like they start fizzling out. It doesn't mean that, oh yeah, do what you want then, because you can't. You haven't got free will. But it's more like it's just like it's an implicit assumption that we're operating dualistically, and that is illusory fundamentally. So I guess for us, or at least how I've understood the problem of evil, or how I would respond to it, is that God themselves are the ones causing the suffering, and the ones, again, suffering the suffering. So the concept of suffering sort of like comes out of relevance, right? It just, at that level at least. And the question itself is just inadequate. But yeah, that's kind of my view on it, I suppose. So let's hear these guys out and see what they have to say on it.
It's the hard question for any worldview.
I suppose it is. It's right. It is a hard question for any worldview, but it's going to be harder for the Abrahamics than it is for us, because they maintain a kind of separate God that exists outside the universal creation. And when you start having a duality with God themselves, then yeah, you're going to get to real problems when it comes to questions like this. Whereas us, it's like, well, no, some of these questions just don't apply given the nature of how we conceptualize the creator. But like, again, a lot of Christians, a lot of Muslims, a lot of Jews, when they've separated out God like that, then yeah, it gets a bit difficult, right? Obviously, not all of them. We've got quite interesting groups within those, like the Gnostics for the Christians, the Kabbalah types for the Jews, the Sufi types for the Muslims, and even when you get the who are like the non-dualists, right? For them, I mean, I suppose, even then, there's probably more nuance to that. So yeah, it is more difficult, I guess, for them than it is for, I guess, the Indic traditions in which to approach this problem by virtue of how God is.
But then one of the reasons why it actually comes up so little is because it almost feels trivial to bring up, because it's the obvious point. It is the argument.
Yeah.
And it's been discussed ad nauseum. And
well,
I don't know if I can...
I think that might be a good topic for another time.
I think so too.
But I will say one thing about it, because whenever this comes up, it often comes up in terms whether people who are discussing it realize it or not, to go back a long way to people like Lucretius and so on. Surely a good God, an all-powerful God should, etc., do this or that. And I've reflected on that a lot, because we've all had endless arguments like that have never come to a satisfactory conclusion.
Right.
And I've started to think about that fact, because as a mathematician, you get problems that people have attacked for centuries and have got nowhere. And the way mathematicians react to that is that they say, perhaps we're asking the wrong question.
Yes, essentially what I said, right? So, yeah, maybe the question itself is wrong. But it'll be interesting now to see, like, what exactly he means by it's the wrong question. Maybe it might be like completely different pages.
And I think I found that helpful in the following way, and I'll be brief. It's this, that what faces everybody is a mixed picture. I call it beauty and bombs. In other words, we look at the world, we see some beautiful things and we see some horrible things, especially these days. And any worldview has got to take that into account. That is a fact. And we can argue as long as we like about the theoretical side, if God is good and all-powerful, why this and why that, why the other? And we never come to a satisfactory answer.
Yeah, I suppose with this, right, we get a lot of like this in Sikhi as well, where we've eulogized God, quite rightfully, right? Like, there's a very important reason why we do this. But if I'm saying something like, oh no, God is the cause of suffering and he's also the one suffering the suffering, but does that make God also not completely compassionate, not completely benevolent either? Is he somebody who causes evil? We'll just look at the language I'm using here. Somebody, we're assuming it's some guy, that's just like some wizard who's doing things. Whereas, like, I don't really think that's the case. I think it's just like what you see is what it is, right? This reality is as it is, and that's what's playing out. It's like it's just us through our dualistic perspectives applying labels to it, but the reality is raw. It is what it is. But then how do we then apply? Why do we apply so many labels of like upasana to it? Why do we give so much devotion, do so much bhakti towards God, and praise Him with all these beautiful labels? Like Dayalu, Kripalu, all this kind of stuff. Where does that come from? Well, it's quite simple, really. It's that fact that if God is this complete oneness, is this state of reality, a state of being in which all this sense of duality is dissipated. Well, then the question is, well, how do we get to that stage? How do we realize that? And so the kind of strategy that's quite clear the gurus have adopted is through like prem bhakti, through loving devotion. And I suppose because love is that one emotion, that mode of being in which you overcome your sort of millions of years of evolution, this instinct to preserve oneself, and actually put an ideal above yourself, and even destroy yourself in the process. Love does that. Like Shahidi does this. So I suppose Prem Bhakti is this thing in which, well, to perform it, you diminish that sense of separateness, that sense of self, and you merge back with that ultimate realization that everything is fundamentally this one existence itself. And yeah, so by doing that, how does then one perform that? Well, then that's where all these labels come in, right? This is where we call God you're all loving, or you're magnificent, you're all inspiring, all this kind of stuff, right? It comes in then. It comes in through the Prem Bhakti. You say it's the boat in which you use to traverse this world ocean, right? It's all metaphors and allegories in which to really touch a human being deeply, and get them to overcome, to lift this veil of duality. And when you get to that stage where you've lifted the veil, then you do realize that, yeah, it's all just this one thing. There is nothing this like this. There was no traversal in the first place. There was no even this point where I wasn't God and now I'm God, right? There's no that's happening either. Like it's an illusion itself that you were separate. So yeah, so that's the ultimate sort of realization there, and that's the kind of tool, the utility of doing Prem Bhakti, because it gets you to that understanding, that realization.
So I propose another question, equally difficult, but I think it gets us a bit further. Granted that it's like that, is there any evidence anywhere that there is a God who understands it, and to such an extent that I can feel, not that I've got an answer, but that I can see there's a possibility of coming to some peace about it? And my answer to that is that yes, I think there is. And it's the fact that the God presented in the Christian Gospels is a God who in that sense has suffered, because the central claim of Christianity is that God became human and that Christ is God. So crudely put, what is God doing on a cross? Well, one thing it certainly shows me is that God has not remained distant from human suffering, but has become part of it.
Yeah, so essentially what he's saying here is what I'd view as an enlightened Christian worldview, like one that kind of more aligns with the position, at least how I understand Sikhi to be, where he's understood the whole mythology of the Bible as a metaphor in which to convey a truth. And the way he's done this is quite masterfully done, right? Where he's actually in fundamentally saying what I was saying in terms of it's God themselves that are suffering and causing the suffering. So this idea that Jesus comes and he goes through these tribulations, gets crucified, all this stuff, right? It's essentially what it is. The whole thing is a kind of metaphor and allegory. It's a story in which to convey that deeper truth. Now, that's what all that reality is. That we are that Christ, right, coming into the world, separated from God in an illusory way. And then, as a part of that separation, we endure suffering. And there's a shabad in Gurbani by Guru Arjan Dev Ji Maharaj, which talks about a very similar thing, right? Where it makes it quite clear that it's just Maharaj themselves playing this game. Like they themselves the actors. So I've got it up on the screen here. So the actor stages a play. This Bajigar playing the many characters in different costumes, and we are these costumes. These identities that we hold. These are the costumes, right? But when the play ends, he takes off the costumes, and then he is one and only one. It's just God themselves coming in these myriad of different forms. It's obviously in Christian tradition, many Christians think God's coming to this one guy called Jesus, who's some historical figure. But I suppose this enlightened Christianity, or an enlightened way to view Christianity, is that Jesus is just merely a metaphor for all of us, right? The same way how Sita is also a metaphor for the self, and how she gets distracted by the golden deer, that is Maya, and then she's separated from her beloved Ram, which is again our metaphor for our separation with Ikko and God as well. So these mythologies, these great stories, etc., are all pertaining to an individual. These religions, these spiritual systems are pertaining to you. They're talking about you yourself. They're not meant to be just these things you memorize and regurgitate. It's meant to be something you apply to your own lives. And even like the play itself is Maharaj. There's another Shabad here because he himself is the play. He himself is the actor. It's just like it's all God. There's nothing but God. Sab Gobind there, Sab Gobind there, Gobind bin nahi koi. So there's this concept of complete and utter oneness. So Sikhi makes it quite clear, I suppose, in many aspects, but it also plays into the duality as well to get a Sikh to engage in Prem Bhakti, so it realizes these truths and really internalize it. Like even I can sort of like regurgitate these things and say them and articulate it in whatever limited understanding I have. But to internalize this and to live with that understanding is I suppose is what the goal is. Ultimately that's what we're trying to do as Sikh, right? To get that understanding through this concept of Prem Bhakti. So what he said here regarding Jesus on the cross, or coming down, and Jesus is suffering. This is why I guess it's important that Christians maintain this mythos that Jesus was God, because there seems like not got. Well, again, this is my understanding of it, right? They seem to not have like understood the part where Jesus is a metaphor for each of us, right? For every individual, where God has come in the form of a human. And endures this play, this pleasure and suffering that goes on. But at the end of the day, when play stops and everything, and these characters stop playing their roles and the costumes come off, it's just God. And it's God putting Jesus on the cross, and it's God themselves on the cross. So it's just all one thing.
And the very interesting thing, Alex, is that in 2011. I arrived in New Zealand 3 days after the earthquake, and I had to meet people who were really going through grief and so on. And I talked in those terms. And I'll never forget when I'd finished talking to the largest congregation this particular place has ever seen, I think. There was a little piece of paper pushed into my hand that said I lost my husband in the earthquake. And what you said about the cross has given me the first glimmer of hope.
Yeah, I suppose a lot of religions in general have gone down this path that a lot of this belief and faith, I suppose, just start forming out like coping mechanisms. I don't want to say that to diminish it. I think it's a very important role to have like mythologies and philosophies and like afterlife myths, all this kind of stuff, to really do help human beings cope. And the less like I guess the less like me you are, sort of hyper analytical, and the more like kind of like philosophy you have, the more like simple you take these things, the easier it is to adopt a lot of these beliefs. Obviously it comes with their risks, like you're also more susceptible to like be or you're more gullible, and you can fall from the nonsense. But you are also have an easier time looking at methodologies, adopting them as beliefs, and really strengthening your resolve in situations of hardship. And that requires you to basically put your reasoning and your logic away. So kind of the opposite of what we're sort of doing here, I suppose, in some regards. But I think as sects, right, it's important to have some of these deeper understandings regarding like, well, what is the system? What is the strategy Maharaj is employing? Where are we ultimately trying to understand? Because it really helps avoid us, again, doing what like a lot of the Abrahamics seem to have got wrong, is that they get really attached to the literalism of stories, and then miss the actual message of them, in order to preserve the sort of like chronological events as they are, for the sake of like just regurgitating it for no reason. Like what they don't extract the value from it, and you can only do that if you actually recognize them as, okay, these are poetic texts in which they embed wisdom. So what is that wisdom? And then how do I apply that wisdom to my own situation? The same way, like, if you went away from the Lion story and just thought about, like, okay, if a situation arises where some Sri Lankan, like, demon arises, right, and it's, like, kidnapping people's wives, then I gotta go raise a monkey army and fight them. Like, that's probably the wrong message to take if that's all you got from it. Where it's, like, more like, well, no, like, here's a deeper message here about fulfilling one's duty, like one's dharam, and contesting tyranny, and all these kind of concepts, right? That's a bit more deeper message from that. Like all of the little mini stories within, like the one I mentioned earlier about the golden deer representing Maya, Sita representing the self, the distraction, the separation from the beloved Ram, and all this kind of stuff, right? That's the stuff where the real value is, and where you can pick that up and apply it to your own life. It doesn't have to be like a Sri Lankan demon. It could be a modern day tyrant over a nation state, right? It could be a completely different situation on the other side of the planet. But it's like those who can successfully extract the meaning from it and then apply it to their own reality. That's where the success lies in these kind of spiritual pursuits, I believe. And it's a difficult thing to attain, because on one side you get a hyper rationalism and say, oh, that can't be real, right? You don't get these monkeys going on, things like that, right? How are they going to communicate? How is he going to jump over the ocean? All this kind of stuff. You know, like, that's just hyper analytical for no reason. And then the other way is like, it's just complete literalism, where you're just taking the stories as complete historical fact, and you just have a very warped sense of reality. Like you truly believe that if you write like certain letters on a stone and you chuck it in the ocean, it's going to float. I mean, it's fine to have some of these beliefs and convictions, but like ultimately when it comes to like actually forming reality, like predicting reality, and maybe like some actual strategy you wish to do something, relying on some of these myths literally is probably not going to get you very far. There's a time and place, there's a role for these things, right? And it's very important not to miss what that role is.
And it ties together something you said just a few minutes ago, which I'd love to discuss in detail, but it would have to be another time. If the cross were the end, we'd never have heard of Jesus. And so for me, the resurrection becomes the central thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's what the apostles preached. It's what Jesus claimed. It's evidence that he was who he claimed to be. And it has those two dimensions. It has the intellectual dimension. How can you possibly believe that Jesus rose from the dead when we know the laws of nature? Hume. And secondly, what is the evidence in terms of personal experience of encounter with Christ who is alive? So that would be possibly a discussion for another time.
Yeah, and I suppose this is where the Christian belief kicks in, right? Like it's not something like that probably can be proven at this point. It's got some kind of time machine going to have a look. But that's not the point, I suppose. I mean, the point is that it is a belief simply because you can't prove it. Otherwise, you probably will. We believe in it in that sense. You have faith in it. But that's what it's sort of like predicated on, these fades. There isn't really like this. This is what kind of my issue with Christianity is that it doesn't have the next part of it where it like goes deeply into what the nature of God is. It doesn't relate these concepts to the myths to the nature of reality, like I've just done here, where saying like, well, the whole point of like Jesus coming as God and then getting crucified and stuff, they can derive a message from that, meaning that God themselves come, God themselves suffer, and God the one causes suffering, right? But you only get that because you've got this kind of like Ikgun God kind of framework in which you're interpreting it through. And this is what I think a lot of Christians sort of lack. I mean, I don't know, this guy, he might not lack it, you might understand it, or he might just be a Christian who believes it in a literal sense. And he truly does just believe it, although he can't prove it. It's almost unfalsifiable. Like no one can really prove it otherwise either, really. But I mean, that's his freedom. He can do what he likes, right? But personally, I believe these are the reasons why I think Sakya is superior, because we don't rely on these beliefs being absolutely true in a literal sense. For us, I suppose the greater value is understanding what is the meaning, what is the derived value from these mythologies and stories and sakyas and even historical events. Like, what can we extract from that to apply to our lives today? Because I believe Sakya, especially the Khalsa within it, is a highly pragmatic project in which we're trying to apply a set of principles in which to achieve a very specific objective, right? And that's for us is to, again, this is my beliefs, that I believe that it's every Khalsa's duty, every Khalsa Banti's duty, or Dharam, to engage in Dharam Yudh. It doesn't have to be physical, but to advance the cause of Khalsa Raj. So how do we take stories from our own traditions, from Hindu traditions, from Islamic traditions, from any tradition, right, to really give us a very good tool set in which to approach modern day problems and handle them with wisdom. So if we start approaching it that way, rather than getting boiled down into debates on literalism or did Baba Deep Singh really fight with his head off, all that kind of stuff, right? That fine, have these ones, whatever, but really the value is, how does Baba Deep Singh's story inspire you to fight tyranny today? How does it give you that bravery, that courage to contest tyrants? That's the kind of stuff that I think is more valuable. But yeah, I mean, we'll stop it there. I mean, if you want to react to more of this particular podcast, let me know. If you have any other videos and stuff you want me to cover, or views, or give me any feedback, right? I'll try and improve these more and more as I do a couple more of them. So yeah, thank you for listening. Right, I'll